Flight attendant hits sick black girl, shocked when her mother arrives. The slap came without warning, a sharp crack of flesh against flesh that echoed through the cabin of American Airlines Flight 2934. Wake up. You can't sleep here. This isn't a hotel. The flight attendant's voice was harsh, dripping with contempt as she stood over 12-year-old Alicia Thompson, who'd been resting with her head against the window, her body burning with fever, her skin clammy with sweat. The word lazy hung in the air unspoken but implied a racist assumption that this black child sleeping in her seat was somehow violating some unwritten rule that didn't apply to the white passengers dozing peacefully all around her. Alicia's eyes flew open, her hand instinctively going to her cheek where the flight attendant had struck her, confusion and pain mixing with the fog of illness that had been consuming her for the past hour. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "I'm not feeling well. I think I have a fever. I was just trying to rest." But the flight attendant, whose name tag read Catherine, just crossed her arms and looked down at Alicia with an expression that made it clear she didn't believe a word, didn't care even if it was true, had already decided this black child was faking for attention. "Stop being so dramatic," Catherine said loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "You kids always have some excuse. You're fine. Sit up straight and stop disrupting other passengers with your theatrics." The accusation was absurd, cruel, medically dangerous. Alicia had been sitting quietly, not bothering anyone, just trying to survive a flight while her body fought whatever infection was ravaging her system. But to Catherine, her presence, her blackness, her perceived weakness was itself disruptive, itself a problem that needed to be controlled. This was American Airlines Flight 2934. Flying from Chicago to Miami at 30,000 feet, and Alicia was trapped in seat 23F with nowhere to go, no escape from an authority figure who just physically assaulted her and was now gaslighting her about her own physical condition. And what happened to Alicia is a stark reminder of how racism had wormed its way into every corner of society, even here in this metal tube in the sky, even to a sick child who'd done nothing wrong except be black and vulnerable in a space where white comfort apparently trumped her basic human rights. Before we continue with the story, welcome to Hyper Racism Channel, where we expose the truth about racial profiling of black people in America, truths the airline industry would rather keep hidden. They don't want us to reach a wide audience, but we're not backing down. Let's make sure the truth gets out. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can reach millions with the facts they've tried to bury. Thanks for hitting that subscribe button and supporting our channel. Alicia tried to explain again, tears streaming down her face now from pain and fever and the humiliation of being slapped in front of dozens of witnesses. "Please, ma'am, I really don't feel good. My head hurts and I'm really hot and I just need to close my eyes for a little while. I'm not trying to cause any problems." But Catherine wasn't listening, had already turned away dismissively, had already decided that this child's suffering was performance, that her illness was manipulation, that her blackness made her inherently untrustworthy. And the worst part? This wasn't the first time Alicia had been treated this way. At 12 years old, she'd already learned that being black meant being suspected, being doubted, being held to different standards. She'd been followed in stores, questioned by teachers when her test scores were too high, accused of cheating when she was just smart. She was shocked by the slap but not surprised by the racism behind it. This was just another day of being black in America, another reminder that her humanity was always up for debate. What Catherine didn't know, what none of the passengers watching this unfold could possibly guess, was that Alicia's condition was about to become critical, and when her mother arrived, everyone involved in this incident would learn a lesson about consequences that would change their lives forever. If you believe no child should ever be physically struck by someone in authority, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination on airplanes is something we left in the 1960s, you need to see what happens next. And if you've ever been treated like your pain doesn't matter because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also, tell us where you are watching from and what time you are watching right now. This story doesn't end the way you think because we're exposing these incidents that airlines don't want you to see. But to understand how a 12-year-old girl ended up being slapped by a flight attendant for the crime of being sick while black, you need to go back 8 hours to when Alicia Thompson's day started with excitement that had been building for weeks. Alicia Thompson was 12 years old, a sixth grader at Frederick Douglass Middle School in Chicago who loved marine biology more than anything in the world. She was the kind of kid who spent hours watching documentaries about coral reefs and deep-sea creatures, who could name 50 species of sharks off the top of her head, who dreamed of becoming a marine biologist and working to protect endangered ocean ecosystems. She was on the honor roll every semester, responsible and mature beyond her years, the type of child teachers trusted to help younger students and lead group projects. Alicia lived with her mother, Dr. Patricia Thompson, a single parent who worked as a senior safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. Patricia had raised Alicia alone since her father passed away from a heart attack when Alicia was 6, and she'd done everything she could to give her daughter opportunities, experiences, and the confidence to pursue her dreams. This trip to Miami was the culmination of months of hard work. Alicia had won a competitive scholarship to attend a week-long marine biology summer camp at the University of Miami, where she'd get to go snorkeling, study with actual marine biologists, and explore her passion in ways her landlocked Chicago life never allowed. She'd beaten out 200 other applicants for one of just 20 spots, and when the acceptance letter arrived, she and her mother had danced around their living room screaming with joy. Patricia had booked the flight, purchased new snorkeling gear, helped Alicia research everything she'd need to know, and spent the week before departure making sure her daughter was prepared for traveling alone as an unaccompanied minor. That morning, Patricia had woken Alicia at 4:30, made her favorite breakfast of French toast and turkey sausage, and helped her pack her carry-on with books about ocean conservation, her tablet loaded with nature documentaries, snacks, and the stuffed dolphin she'd had since she was 3 that she couldn't sleep without. They'd taken an Uber to O'Hare Airport, both of them tired but excited, talking about all the amazing things Alicia would learn, about the fish she'd see, about how this could be the first step toward her dream career. Patricia had checked her in, walked her through security, waited with her at the gate going over instructions one more time. If you feel sick, tell a flight attendant immediately. If anyone makes you uncomfortable, call me. Remember you're smart and capable and you belong everywhere you go. But during that wait at the gate, Alicia had started feeling off. Her head ached dully, her throat felt scratchy, and she was warmer than normal despite the airport air conditioning. She'd mentioned it to her mother, who felt her forehead with concern. "You're a little warm, baby. Do you want to postpone the trip? We can reschedule." But Alicia had insisted she was fine, probably just nervous, probably just needed to rest on the plane. Patricia had reluctantly agreed, given her daughter some ibuprofen, made her promise to tell the flight crew if she felt worse. When boarding was called, Patricia hugged Alicia tight, straightened her favorite purple hoodie, and reminded her one more time to call if she needed anything. The flight attendant who checked Alicia in at the gate, a kind older woman named Maria, had been warm and reassuring. "Don't worry, Mama. I'll keep an eye on her. She'll be just fine." Alicia had waved goodbye to her mother, walked down the jetway feeling grown up and independent, found seat 23F by the window in economy, and settled in with her dolphin and her marine biology book. The plane was a standard Boeing 737, middle-aged and worn, with seats that had seen better days and overhead bins already stuffed with luggage. Other passengers filed past, a mix of business travelers, families, college students. Most of the crew seemed professional and polite. A young male flight attendant named David helped an elderly woman with her bag and smiled at Alicia. "First time flying alone?" he'd asked kindly. She nodded shyly. "You'll do great. If you need anything, just press your call button." Then Catherine appeared. She'd walked past Alicia twice during boarding, and both times her eyes had lingered with an expression Alicia couldn't quite identify but that made her uncomfortable. The third time Catherine passed, she stopped and looked down at Alicia with barely concealed disapproval. "You're traveling alone?" Alicia nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. I'm going to a marine biology camp in Miami." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. "Where's your parents? Did they actually pay for this ticket, or is this some kind of charity program?" The question was loaded with racist assumptions, with the belief that a black child couldn't possibly afford to fly without some kind of handout. Alicia felt her face flush with shame and anger. "My mom paid for it," she said quietly. "She works for the FAA." Catherine's expression made it clear she didn't believe that either, But she walked away without another word, leaving Alicia feeling small and judged for reasons she couldn't control. As the plane pushed back from the gate and took off, Alicia's fever spiked. Her head pounded, her body ached, and she felt waves of nausea that made her close her eyes and lean against the cool window, trying to find some relief. That's when Catherine had returned, seen her resting, and without warning or compassion, slapped her awake. Alicia sat in seat 23F trying to process what had just happened, her cheeks still stinging from Catherine's slap, her body shaking with fever that was getting worse by the minute. She felt dizzy, nauseous, like the cabin was spinning around her even though the plane was flying straight and level. Her head pounded with a pain so intense it made her vision blur, and every breath felt like it took effort she didn't have. Something was very wrong, worse than just a cold or flu, but she was 12 years old and alone, and the one adult with authority had just hit her and called her dramatic. Catherine returned 20 minutes later during beverage service, pushing the cart down the aisle with a smile for the white passengers, asking what they'd like to drink, chatting pleasantly about the weather in Miami. But when she reached Alicia's row, her expression shifted to cold disdain. "You want something, or are you going to keep pretending to be sick for attention?" Alicia tried to speak, but her throat was so dry the words came out as a raspy whisper. "Water, please. I really don't feel good. My head hurts really bad and I'm so hot." Catherine rolled her eyes dramatically, making sure surrounding passengers could see her exasperation with this difficult child. "You're being ridiculous. You're fine. Stop making a scene." She poured a tiny plastic cup of water, barely 2 ounces, and slammed it on Alicia's tray table hard enough that half of it sloshed out. Happy now?" Then she moved on to the next row, her voice immediately brightening as she asked a white businessman what he'd prefer, coffee or orange juice, offering him extra snacks with a warm smile. Alicia drank the remaining water in one desperate gulp, but it did nothing to help the fever burning through her body or the chills that made her shake despite being wrapped in her hoodie. She pressed the call button above her seat, the little light blinking urgently, a silent plea for help that went ignored for 15 minutes while flight attendants walked past multiple times, saw the light, and kept moving. When a different attendant, a young white woman named Brittany, finally responded, her tone was already annoyed before Alicia even spoke. "What do you need?" "I'm sick," Alicia managed, her voice weak and strained. "I think I need help. I can't breathe right and my head really hurts and I'm really hot. Could you maybe call my mom or get me some medicine or something?" Brittany looked at her with the same skepticism Catherine had shown, the same assumption that this black child was exaggerating for attention. "You're breathing fine. You're talking to me right now. If you were really having trouble breathing, you wouldn't be able to speak. You're just nervous about flying. Try to relax." "But I'm not nervous," Alicia insisted, tears streaming down her face now from pain and fear and frustration. "I fly sometimes. This is different. Something's really wrong. Please, can you just check on me or call someone?" Brittany's expression hardened. "Look, sweetie, we can't call your parents every time you feel a little uncomfortable. You need to be a big girl and handle this yourself. Try to sleep it off." She walked away before Alicia could respond, leaving her alone with an illness that was rapidly getting worse. 30 minutes later, Alicia's breathing changed. It became rapid and shallow, her chest heaving with effort, a wheeze developing that she couldn't control. She was gulping air like she'd been running sprints, her heart racing so fast she could feel it pounding against her ribs, sweat pouring down her face and soaking through her hoodie. She pressed the call button again, desperately, repeatedly, the light blinking frantically above her seat like a distress signal that no one wanted to acknowledge. Catherine appeared this time, her face twisted with anger at being summoned again by this child who refused to stop being a problem. "Well now, I can't breathe," Alicia gasped between labored breaths. "Please help me. Something's really wrong. I need help. Please." The desperation in her voice, the visible struggle to get air, should have triggered immediate medical protocols, should have sent Catherine running for the emergency medical kit and calling for any doctors on board. Instead, Catherine took one look at Alicia's brown skin, at her sweating face, at her struggling body, and made a decision rooted in centuries of racist stereotypes about black people carrying diseases, being dirty, being dangerous to touch. "I can't help you," she said, backing away from Alicia's seat like the child was contaminated. I don't know what kind of diseases you might have. You could be contagious. I'm not putting myself or other passengers at risk by touching you. You need to calm down and stop being hysterical. The words landed like physical blows. Diseases. Contagious. The implication that Alicia's blackness made her inherently diseased, that her medical emergency was somehow a threat to white passengers, that her suffering was less important than Catherine's racist fear. Other passengers heard this exchange, saw a child struggling to breathe, saw a flight attendant refusing to provide medical assistance, and did nothing. Some looked uncomfortable. Some whispered to their seatmates. Some recorded on their phones, documenting the incident but not intervening, choosing to be witnesses rather than helpers. Alicia felt the cabin tilting, felt darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision, felt her body giving up the fight to stay conscious. She tried to call out for her mother, tried to say she was scared, tried to ask someone, anyone, to please just help her. But the words wouldn't come. Her breathing was too labored, too fast, her lungs burning with the effort of pulling in air that didn't seem to contain enough oxygen. A businessman across the aisle finally spoke up, his voice uncertain but concerned. "Hey, I think that kid really is sick. She doesn't look good at all. Shouldn't someone check on her?" Catherine whirled on him with defensive anger. "Sir, I'm a trained flight attendant with 15 years of experience. I know how to assess passenger medical situations. This child is having an anxiety attack and seeking attention. The best thing we can all do is ignore the behavior and it will stop." But Alicia's breathing was getting worse, not better. Her lips were starting to turn pale, her skin taking on an ashen quality that contrasted with the fever sweat still pouring off her. She slumped against the window, no longer able to hold herself upright, her stuffed dolphin falling from her lap onto the floor where it lay forgotten, a symbol of the innocent child who'd boarded this plane excited about marine biology camp and was now fighting for every breath while adults who should have protected her turned away. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew someone needed help but everyone around you pretended not to see? Drop a comment if you've witnessed something like this. What would you have done? Alicia's world had narrowed to a tunnel of pain and oxygen deprivation. She couldn't think clearly anymore, couldn't form coherent thoughts beyond the primal panic of not being able to breathe. Her chest felt like it was being crushed, each attempt to inhale meeting resistance, her body working so hard for air that her muscles were exhausted. She tried to reach for the call button again, but her arm felt too heavy to lift, her coordination failing as her brain struggled with insufficient oxygen. The passenger in the seat next to her, a white woman in her 30s who'd been wearing headphones and ignoring everything around her, finally pulled them off and looked at Alicia with a growing alarm. "Oh my God, she's not faking. Look at her. Something's really wrong." She reached across and pressed Alicia's call button herself, then stood up in the aisle waving frantically for a flight attendant. "Someone needs to help this girl right now. She can barely breathe." Catherine appeared with that same expression of annoyed disdain, ready to dismiss another complaint about the dramatic black child. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We have the situation under control." The woman's voice rose with urgency and anger. "No, you don't. Look at her. Really look at her. She's gray. Her lips are pale. She's struggling for every breath. This is a medical emergency and you're ignoring it. If something happens to this child because you refuse to help her, that's on you." Other passengers were paying attention now, the tension in the cabin rising as more people noticed Alicia's distress. A man several rows back called out, "Is there a doctor on this flight? We need medical help up here." Catherine's face flushed with defensive anger, her authority being challenged, her judgment being questioned. "I am trained in first aid and emergency response. This child is having a panic attack. The worst thing we can do is give her attention that reinforces the behavior." But even as Catherine spoke, Alicia's breathing changed again, becoming even more labored, a rattling sound developing in her chest that was audible to everyone nearby. Her eyes were starting to roll back, her body going limp against the seat, and the woman who'd called for help grabbed Catherine's arm with real fear in her voice. "If you don't help her right now, I'm calling 911 the second we land and reporting every single person on this crew for negligence. That child is dying in front of us." Catherine finally, reluctantly, went to get the medical kit, moving with exaggerated slowness that suggested she still believed this was all performance. But when she returned and actually looked at Alicia up close, even she couldn't deny what was obvious to everyone else. The child was in serious medical distress. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her pulse racing, her skin clammy and pale despite the fever. Catherine's hands shook as she pulled out a thermometer, finally taking the basic vital signs she should have checked an hour ago when Alicia first said she was sick. 104.2 degrees. The number displayed on the digital thermometer made Catherine go pale. That's a dangerous fever. She trailed off, realizing that her dismissal of this child's illness, her refusal to provide care, her racist assumption that Alicia was faking, had allowed a medical emergency to escalate to life-threatening levels. Other crew members gathered now, the urgency finally penetrating their indifference, but it was too late for preventive care. They were in crisis management now. Is there a doctor or nurse on this flight? The captain's voice came over the intercom. We have a medical emergency and need immediate assistance. A black woman from several rows back rushed forward, her voice sharp with professional authority. I'm a nurse. Move aside. Let me see her. She pushed past Catherine and Brittany, both of whom had suddenly become very interested in helping now that witnesses were watching, now that their negligence was being documented on multiple phones. The nurse, whose name was Angela Porter, took one look at Alicia and her expression went grim. This child is in respiratory distress with a dangerously high fever. How long has she been like this? The woman in the next seat spoke up immediately. She's been saying she was sick for over an hour. She asked for help multiple times and the flight attendants kept telling her she was being dramatic and refused to provide care. Angela's eyes flashed with fury as she looked at Catherine and Brittany. You let a child deteriorate to this point? What is wrong with you? She pulled out her own medical supplies from her carry-on, checking Alicia's oxygen levels with a pulse oximeter, timing her breathing, assessing her level of consciousness. Her oxygen saturation is at 87%. That's critically low. She's likely got some kind of severe infection, possibly pneumonia or meningitis based on the fever and respiratory symptoms. This plane needs to land immediately. This child needs a hospital now. The captain came on the intercom again, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, we're diverting to the nearest airport for a medical emergency. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. But 15 minutes felt like an eternity to Alicia, whose consciousness was fading in and out, whose body was shutting down from the combination of high fever, oxygen deprivation, and the stress of being ignored and dismissed for so long. Angela worked frantically, doing everything she could with the limited supplies available at 30,000 feet. She elevated Alicia's legs, administered oxygen from the plane's emergency supply, used cold compresses on her forehead and neck to try to bring down the fever, spoke to her in a calm, steady voice even though Alicia could barely hear her anymore. Stay with me, baby. You're going to be okay. We're getting you help. Just hold on a little bit longer. But Alicia's eyes were closing, her breathing becoming even more erratic, her body no longer responding to external stimuli. The passengers who'd been ignoring her suffering for the past hour watched in horror as this child's life hung in the balance, as the consequences of their silence and the crew's racism played out in real time. Some were crying. Some were praying. Some were still recording, documenting evidence that would later destroy careers and change policies. Catherine stood frozen in the galley, the full weight of what she'd done finally sinking in. She'd hit a sick child. She'd called her dramatic. She'd refused medical care based on racist stereotypes. She'd let this medical emergency escalate because she valued her own prejudice over a child's life. And now that child might die, right here on this plane, because Catherine had decided that a black girl's suffering didn't matter. Angela looked up at the flight attendants with contempt and fury. One of you needs to contact this child's parents immediately. They need to know their daughter is critical and being diverted to a hospital. And they need to know exactly why her condition was allowed to get this bad. Someone get me her information now. Brittany, shaking, pulled up Alicia's passenger information on a tablet. Her emergency contact is her mother, Dr. Patricia Thompson. There's a note here that she works for the FAA. Angela's eyebrows shot up. Her mother works for the Federal Aviation Administration? Catherine and Brittany exchanged looks of pure terror as the implications of that information sank in. "Oh God," Brittany whispered. The plane began its emergency descent, the crew preparing for priority landing, and Alicia's breathing became so shallow it was almost imperceptible. Angela's voice rose with urgency. "She's losing consciousness. We're losing her. Someone call that mother right now and tell her to meet us at whatever hospital we're going to. This child needs her mother." But as the phone call connected, as someone began explaining to Alicia Thompson that her daughter was in critical condition on a diverted flight, Alicia's eyes closed completely and her body went limp in the seat, her last conscious thought a whispered prayer that her mother would come save her like she always did. What would you do if you were a passenger witnessing this? Would you speak up or would you stay silent? Be honest. Drop your answer below. There's no judgment here. We're all learning. The plane dropped altitude rapidly, the emergency descent making passengers grip their armrests, overhead bins rattling, the pressure change popping ears throughout the cabin. But nobody cared about their own discomfort anymore. Every eye was on row 23, on the black nurse named Angela Porter who was working desperately to keep a 12-year-old girl alive while flight attendants who'd spent an hour dismissing her illness now stood frozen in useless panic. Alicia's breathing had become so shallow that Angela had to put her face close to the child's mouth to confirm she was still getting any air at all. Her oxygen saturation had dropped to 82%, dangerously low, her lips taking on a bluish tint that made Angela's stomach drop with professional dread. "Come on, baby, stay with me. Your mom is coming. You've got to hold on. She's coming for you." Angela pressed the oxygen mask tighter against Alicia's face, willing the supplemental oxygen to be enough, knowing it probably wasn't, knowing this child needed interventions that weren't possible on an airplane. The woman in the seat next to Alicia, the one who'd finally called for help, was crying openly now. Is she going to die? Oh God, is she going to die because no one helped her? Angela didn't answer because she didn't know, because the honest answer was maybe, because this child's condition was critical and deteriorating and every minute that had been wasted with Catherine's racism had brought them closer to a tragedy that should never have happened. Catherine stood in the aisle, her face ashen, her hands shaking, watching the consequences of her prejudice play out in real time. She tried to approach, tried to help now that witnesses were everywhere, but Angela turned on her with fury that made Catherine stumble backward. "You don't touch her. You don't come near her. You've done enough damage. You need to stay away from this child and pray she survives what you did to her." The words hit like physical blows, and Catherine's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but Angela had no sympathy to spare. Her focus was entirely on Alicia. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, strained but controlled. "Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for emergency landing. We'll be on the ground in 5 minutes. Emergency medical services will be waiting." But 5 minutes felt like an eternity when every second counted, when Alicia's chest was barely rising and falling, when her pulse was racing so fast under Angela's fingers that it felt like her heart might give out from the strain. Other passengers were on their phones now, the ones who'd been recording the entire incident, the ones who'd watched a child suffer and done nothing until it was almost too late. They were texting loved ones, posting on social media, calling news stations, documenting what would become one of the most viral examples of in-flight medical negligence and racism in recent history. A businessman 3 rows back was on the phone with his lawyer, already talking about witness statements and liability. A college student was live streaming with shaking hands, her voice breaking as she narrated what was happening. This girl has been sick for over an hour and the flight attendants did nothing. They called her dramatic. They refused to help her. And now she's dying. Angela checked Alicia's pulse again and her professional mask slipped for just a moment, terror flashing across her face. Her heart rate is dangerously high and irregular. She's going into shock. We need to be on the ground right now. She looked up at the flight attendants with desperation. How much longer? Brittany, who'd been watching with horrified guilt, checked with the cockpit. 2 minutes. The ambulance is already waiting on the tarmac. But in those 2 minutes, Alicia's condition crashed. Her breathing became even more labored, then suddenly stopped altogether. Her chest went still. Her body went limp. and Angela's voice rose in a scream that made everyone in the cabin freeze with horror. "She's not breathing. I need help." She tilted Alicia's head back, checked her airway, and began rescue breathing, forcing air into the child's lungs while another passenger who identified himself as a paramedic rushed forward to help with chest compressions if needed. The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers were shouting, crying, praying. Catherine had collapsed into a jump seat, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Brittany was on the phone with emergency services, her voice shaking so badly she could barely speak. The captain was on the radio declaring a medical emergency, requesting priority clearance, pushing the plane to land as fast as physically possible. Angela breathed into Alicia's mouth, counting, watching the child's chest rise and fall with the forced air, begging her to start breathing on her own again. "Come on, sweetheart. Breathe. Your mama needs you. Breathe for your mama." And after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 seconds, Alicia gasped, a horrible rattling sound, and began breathing again on her own. Weak, shallow, barely adequate, but breathing. "Thank God," Angela whispered, tears streaming down her own face now. "Thank God." But they weren't out of danger yet. Alicia was unconscious, unresponsive, her body shutting down from whatever infection was ravaging her system. She needed a hospital, needed doctors, needed interventions that were minutes away but might still be too late. The plane touched down hard, the emergency landing rougher than normal, tires squealing, brakes engaging with force that threw everyone forward against their seatbelts. The second the plane stopped moving, before it even reached the gate, the forward door opened and paramedics stormed aboard with a stretcher, medical equipment, controlled urgency that came from years of training. Female child, 12 years old, high fever, respiratory distress, briefly stopped breathing in flight. Angela rattled off information while the paramedics assessed Alicia and began transferring her to the stretcher. She's been symptomatic for over an hour but was denied medical care by the flight crew. This should never have gotten this bad. The lead paramedic's expression darkened at that information, but his focus remained on Alicia. "Understood. We've got her now." He looked at Angela with gratitude and respect. "You saved her life. Thank you." They lifted the stretcher, rushing Alicia off the plane and toward the waiting ambulance, oxygen mask over her small face, for already being started, moving with practiced efficiency. Angela followed to the aircraft door, watching them load the unconscious child into the ambulance, and turned back to face Catherine and Brittany and the captain who'd emerged from the cockpit. "That child almost died because of racism," she said, her voice carrying through the silent cabin. "She begged for help and you called her dramatic. She told you she couldn't breathe and you said she had diseases. Every single person responsible for this needs to be held accountable. This isn't just negligence. This is attempted murder by indifference." The passengers who'd recorded everything nodded, their phones full of evidence, their faces set with determination that justice would be served. Catherine tried to speak, tried to defend herself, but no words came. What defense was there? A child had nearly died in her care because Catherine's racism had been more important than that child's life. The ambulance pulled away with sirens wailing, racing toward the nearest hospital, and in the shocked silence that followed, everyone on that plane understood they'd just witnessed something that would change lives forever. Some for the better, forcing them to confront their own silence and complicity. Some for the worse, as careers ended and consequences began. But the person most affected was lying unconscious in that ambulance, fighting for her life, waiting for her mother to arrive and save her like she always did. The question was, would Patricia Thompson get there in time? The ambulance screamed through Miami traffic, sirens blaring, lights flashing, paramedics working over Alicia's unconscious body with controlled urgency. Her fever had spiked to 105 degrees, her breathing remained dangerously shallow despite the oxygen mask, and her small body looked even more fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency vehicle. The lead paramedic, a veteran named Carlos Rodriguez, had seen thousands of medical emergencies in his career, but there was something about this case that made his blood boil with rage beneath his professional calm. "Dispatch," he radioed ahead to the hospital. "We have a 12-year-old female, African-American, severe respiratory distress, fever of 105, altered mental status." Be advised this is a case of medical neglect. Patient was symptomatic for over an hour on aircraft and crew refused to provide care. We need pediatric critical care standing by. The dispatcher's response came back immediately, Roger that. Jackson Memorial is ready for you. ETA 3 minutes. And Carlos, her mother's been contacted. She's She's on her way. At Chicago O'Hare Airport, 300 miles away, Patricia Thompson was in her office conducting a routine safety inspection when her phone rang with a Miami area code. Dr. Thompson? This is Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. Your daughter Alicia was on American Airlines Flight 2934 which made an emergency landing. She's being transported to our emergency department right now. You need to come immediately. The words didn't make sense at first, Patricia's brain refusing to process that her healthy, excited daughter who'd boarded a plane just hours ago was now in an ambulance fighting for her life. What happened? Patricia's voice came out strangled, terrified. What's wrong with her? The hospital administrator on the line chose his words carefully. She has a severe infection with high fever and respiratory distress. The situation is critical. But Dr. Thompson, there's something else you need to know. Your daughter reported feeling ill early in the flight and was denied medical care by the crew. Multiple witnesses have come forward stating she was physically struck and her symptoms were dismissed for over an hour before she lost consciousness. Patricia felt the world tilt, felt rage and terror mixing into something that made her vision go red. My daughter was hit? She asked for help and they refused? Her voice rose to a shout. Someone put their hands on my baby and let her get sick enough to lose consciousness? The administrator's silence was answer enough. Dr. Thompson, we need you here as fast as possible. Your daughter needs you. Patricia grabbed her FAA badge, her credentials, her phone, and ran. She was 300 miles away, and commercial flights would take hours by the time she got through security and waited for departure. But Patricia Thompson was a senior safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration, which meant she had access that most parents didn't. She called her supervisor while running to her car. I need emergency transport to Miami. My daughter is critical at Jackson Memorial and I need to be there now. Her supervisor, who'd worked with Patricia for 15 years, didn't hesitate. I'm arranging a charter. Get to the private terminal. You'll be wheels up in 20 minutes. The ambulance pulled up to Jackson Memorial's emergency entrance, and a trauma team was waiting. They transferred Alicia from the stretcher to a hospital gurney in one smooth motion, already calling out vitals, starting additional IVs, rushing her toward the pediatric intensive care unit. Her fever was still climbing, now at 105.6, her breathing so labored that the attending physician made an immediate decision. We need to intubate. Get respiratory here now. This child can't maintain her airway. Within minutes, Alicia was in the PICU surrounded by machines, monitors beeping, for lines running medications to fight the infection that was trying to kill her, a breathing tube down her throat because her body could no longer do the work on its own. The pediatric intensivist, Dr. Sarah Chin, reviewed the preliminary tests and her face went grim. She has bacterial meningitis. Extremely aggressive strain. Another hour without treatment and we'd be looking at brain damage or death. She looked at the nurse documenting everything. Make sure it's noted in the chart that symptoms were present and reported for over an hour before any medical intervention. This is a case of criminal negligence. Patricia's charter plane landed at Miami Executive Airport 90 minutes after that phone call, and she had a police escort waiting to rush her to the hospital, lights and sirens clearing traffic. She burst through the PICU doors like a force of nature, her FA badge still clipped to her jacket, her face a mask of terror and fury. Where's my daughter? Where's Alicia Thompson? A nurse guided her to the room where Alicia lay unconscious, connected to more machines than Patricia could count, a breathing tube obscuring her small face, looking so tiny and vulnerable in the hospital bed. Patricia's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the doorframe for support, a sound escaping her throat that was part sob, part scream, the kind of anguish only a parent watching their child suffer could make. Dr. Chin approached immediately, her voice gentle but professional. Dr. Thompson? I'm Dr. Chin, the attending. Your daughter has bacterial meningitis. It's a severe infection but we caught it in time. She's on strong antibiotics and we're managing her fever. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical, but I believe she's going to pull through." Patricia couldn't speak, could only nod, tears streaming down her face as she moved to Alicia's bedside and took her daughter's hand, careful not to disturb the 4 lines. "I'm here, baby," she whispered. "Mommy's here. You're safe now. I've got you." But even as she said those words, even as she held her daughter's hand and watched the machines breathe for her, Patricia's mind was already shifting into another mode. Someone had done this to her child. Someone had hit her, dismissed her, let her suffer until she nearly died. And Patricia Thompson was not just a terrified mother. She was a senior safety inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration with the power to destroy careers and ground airlines. And she was going to use every ounce of that power to make sure everyone responsible paid for what they'd done to her baby. Dr. Chin cleared her throat gently. "Dr. Thompson, there's something you should know. Multiple passengers from the flight have already come forward. They recorded what happened. They're willing to provide statements. Your daughter repeatedly asked for help and was denied. The flight attendant who struck her is on video. All of it is documented." Patricia looked up from Alicia's bedside, and Dr. Chin actually took a step back from the cold fury in her eyes. "Good," Patricia said quietly, her voice deadly calm. "Because I'm going to need every piece of evidence when I destroy that airline and everyone who let my daughter suffer." Dr. Chin nodded. "There's a police detective waiting to speak with you when you're ready. This is being investigated as assault of a minor and medical negligence." Patricia squeezed Alicia's hand gently. "They're investigating the wrong charges," she said. "This is attempted murder. And I'm going to make sure they understand that." Outside Alicia's room, the hospital administrator was already fielding calls from news stations, from the airline's legal team, from the FAA's investigative division. The story was spreading fast, the videos from passengers' phones already going viral, the hashtag Justice for Alicia trending on social media. American Airlines stock was dropping as the full scope of what their crew had done became public knowledge. But none of that mattered to Patricia as she sat beside her unconscious daughter, holding her hand, whispering promises that she would make this right, that the people who hurt her would face consequences, that justice would be served. She just needed Alicia to wake up. She needed her baby to open her eyes and tell her what happened in her own words. Because a mother's rage was powerful, but a victim's testimony was irrefutable. The question was, when Alicia woke up, would she remember everything? Would she be able to tell her story? Or would the trauma and illness have stolen those memories, leaving them with only the videos and witness statements to prove what had been done to an innocent child who'd simply wanted to attend marine biology camp? What would you do if you were a passenger witnessing this? Would you speak up, or would you stay silent? Be honest. Drop your answer below. There's no judgment here. We're all learning. Patricia sat vigil beside Alicia's hospital bed for 3 days straight, leaving only to use the bathroom and take calls from FAA investigators who were already building a case that would shake the entire aviation industry. She held her daughter's hand, watched the monitors track every heartbeat and breath, and waited with a mother's desperate hope for Alicia to open her eyes. The antibiotics were working, Dr. Chin assured her. The fever had broken. The infection markers in Alicia's blood were dropping. Her body was healing. But consciousness remained elusive, Alicia trapped in some in-between state where her brain protected itself from trauma by staying asleep. During those 3 days, the world outside exploded with outrage. The videos from passengers' phones had been viewed millions of times, each one showing a sick black child begging for help while a white flight attendant dismissed her, refused to touch her, let her deteriorate until she stopped breathing. News anchors called it unconscionable. Civil rights leaders called it attempted murder. Medical professionals called it the most egregious case of negligent care they'd ever witnessed. And the public called for heads to roll. American Airlines suspended Catherine Miller and Brittany Walsh immediately, along with the captain and 2 other crew members who'd witnessed Alicia's distress and done nothing. But suspension wasn't enough for Patricia. She'd spent 3 days on the phone with lawyers, with FAA colleagues, with anyone who had power to ensure that what happened to her daughter resulted in systemic change, not just individual scapegoating. She'd also spent those 3 days reviewing every piece of evidence, watching the videos until she could recite Catherine's words from memory, documenting a case so airtight that no lawyer in the world could defend it. On the morning of the fourth day, Alicia's eyes fluttered open. The breathing tube had been removed the night before, her lungs strong enough to work on their own again, and when she saw her mother sitting beside her bed, tears streaming down Patricia's face, Alicia's first words were exactly what Patricia expected. "Did I miss marine biology camp?" Patricia laughed and cried at the same time, leaning forward to kiss her daughter's forehead with infinite gentleness. "Baby, we're going to get you to marine biology camp. But first, we need to talk about what happened on that plane." Alicia's face clouded with memory, with pain that was emotional as much as physical. "The lady hit me," she whispered, her voice still hoarse from the breathing tube. "I told her I was sick and she said I was being dramatic. She wouldn't help me. Nobody would help me. I couldn't breathe and I was so scared and I kept asking and they just kept walking past me like I wasn't even there." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "Mom, why didn't anyone help me? What did I do wrong?" Patricia's heart shattered and hardened simultaneously, the mother's anguish mixing with the inspector's resolve. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. Not one single thing. What happened to you was racism. It was adults failing you in the worst possible way. And I promise you they're going to answer for it." She pulled out her phone and called the detective who'd been waiting for Alicia to wake up. "She's conscious and she's ready to give her statement." Within hours, Detective Marcus Johnson arrived with a video camera and a child psychologist trained in interviewing juvenile victims. They were gentle but thorough, asking Alicia to recount everything she remembered from the moment Catherine first slapped her to the moment she lost consciousness. Alicia's testimony was devastating in its clarity and detail. She remembered asking for help multiple times. She remembered Catherine saying she couldn't touch her because she might have diseases. She remembered passengers recording on their phones but not helping. She remembered thinking she was going to die and her mother would never know what happened. The detective looked at Patricia when the interview concluded. "Dr. Thompson, between your daughter's testimony and the video evidence from 7 different passengers, we have more than enough for criminal charges. Catherine Miller is being charged with battery of a minor, child endangerment, and felony negligence resulting in serious bodily harm. The other crew members are being charged as accessories for failing to intervene. And the FAA is pursuing their own investigation for federal aviation safety violations." But Patricia wasn't satisfied with just criminal charges. She'd already retained the best civil rights attorney in Florida, a woman named Claudia Martinez who specialized in discrimination cases. Together they filed a lawsuit against American Airlines for $25 million, citing negligent hiring practices, inadequate training, systemic racism, and willful indifference to passenger safety. The lawsuit included demands for policy changes across the entire industry, mandatory implicit bias training for all crew members, zero-tolerance policies for discrimination with immediate termination, independent review boards for passenger complaints, and body cameras on all flight attendants during disputes. The airline's initial response had been defensive, their lawyers claiming Catherine had acted alone, that this wasn't representative of their company culture. But Patricia had 3 days to build her case, and what she'd found in American Airlines records was damning. Catherine Miller had 6 previous complaints about differential treatment of black passengers, all noted in her file but resulting in nothing more than written warnings. The airline had known she was racist and kept her employed anyway. That pattern of negligence, that willingness to protect a problematic employee rather than vulnerable passengers, was going to cost them everything. Within a week, the pressure became too intense. American Airlines fired Catherine Miller, Brittany Walsh, and 3 other crew members. They issued a public apology that Patricia immediately rejected as insufficient. They offered a settlement that Patricia's lawyer laughed at. And when they realized Patricia Thompson wasn't going to quietly accept money and go away, when they understood she was going to drag them through a very public trial that would expose decades of tolerating racism, they finally capitulated. The settlement, when it came, included the $25 million, but more importantly, it included enforceable policy changes, quarterly audits by independent civil rights organizations, mandatory reporting of all discrimination complaints to the FAA, and funding for a non-profit Patricia would establish to advocate for airline passenger rights. Catherine Miller pled guilty to avoid trial and received 2 years in prison plus 5 years probation. The other crew members accepted plea deals with lesser sentences but permanent bans from working in aviation. Would you have apologized if you were one of those silent passengers? What would you say? Sometimes the hardest words are "I'm sorry I didn't help." Drop your thoughts below. 2 months after being released from the hospital, Alicia stood in front of a packed conference room at the Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C. Her mother had been asked to lead a new task force on discrimination in air travel, and Alicia had volunteered to share her story as part of the mandatory training that would now be required for every airline employee in America. She was nervous, her hands shaking slightly as she held her note cards, but her voice was steady when she began to speak. "My name is Alicia Thompson. I'm 12 years old. 2 months ago, I almost died on an airplane because a flight attendant decided my black skin meant my pain didn't matter." She paused, looking around the room at the hundreds of airline executives, crew members, and FAA officials listening. "I told her I was sick. I begged for help. I said I couldn't breathe. And she hit me, called me dramatic, and said she couldn't touch me because I might have diseases. That's what racism looks like. Not always burning crosses and slurs. Sometimes it's just deciding that a black child's suffering isn't worth your time." The room was absolutely silent, every person absorbed in her words, many visibly emotional. "But here's what I want you to understand," Alicia continued, her confidence growing. "It wasn't just that flight attendant who almost killed me. It was every crew member who walked past me while I was struggling to breathe. It was every passenger who recorded my suffering but didn't intervene. It was the airline that had complaints about that flight attendant's racism for years and did nothing. All of you, everyone in this system, you're responsible for creating the culture that said my life didn't matter as much as everyone else's." She looked directly at a group of flight attendants in the front row. "The next time you see someone who needs help, I want you to imagine it's your daughter, your sister, your niece. And then I want you to help them the way you'd want someone to help your family. Not because they might sue. Not because their parent might be important. But because they're human and they deserve care. Because if you don't, you're not just failing one passenger. You're telling every black person on that plane that their lives are worth less. That their pain is less real. That their humanity is negotiable." Alicia closed her notes and spoke from her heart. "I missed marine biology camp. I spent a week in the hospital. I have nightmares about not being able to breathe. But I'm here today because someone finally helped. A black woman named Angela Porter saved my life when everyone else had given up on me. Be like her. Be the person who helps. Because next time, there might not be an Angela. Next time, a child might actually die. And you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it but chose your comfort over their life." The room remained silent for a long moment after she finished, the weight of her words settling on shoulders that needed to carry that burden. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not polite conference applause, but the kind that came from people genuinely moved, genuinely changed, genuinely committed to doing better. That evening, Alicia sat with her mother on the hotel balcony overlooking the National Mall, the Washington Monument lit up against the darkening sky. They'd spent the day at the FAA, at congressional hearings, at meetings with airline executives who were scrambling to implement changes before more lawsuits landed on their desks. Patricia had watched her daughter speak truth to power with a courage that made her simultaneously proud and heartbroken that such courage was necessary. "Mom," Alicia said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you think things will really change? Or will people just be more careful for a little while until everyone forgets what happened to me?" Patricia looked at her daughter, at this 12-year-old child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd learned lessons about racism and injustice that no child should have to learn, and struggled to find words that were both honest and hopeful. "I think some things will change," Patricia said carefully. "Those policy changes we fought for, the training programs, the oversight committees, those are real and enforceable. Airlines that don't comply will lose their operating certificates. That's power we didn't have before. But baby, I'm not going to lie to you. Racism doesn't disappear because we won a lawsuit. It's deeper than that. It's in people's hearts and minds, And changing hearts is harder than changing policies. Alicia nodded, processing. So what was the point? If people are still going to be racist, why did we fight so hard? Why did we do all of this? Patricia pulled her daughter close, choosing her words carefully because she knew this answer would shape how Alicia understood justice for the rest of her life. We fought because your life matters, she said firmly. We fought because the next black child who gets sick on a plane deserves better than what you got. We fought because Catherine Miller needed to face consequences, and that airline needed to understand that ignoring racism has a cost. Did we fix everything? But we made it better. We made it safer. We created accountability where there was none. That's not nothing, baby. That's everything. But I'm still scared to fly, Alicia admitted, her voice small. I have nightmares about being trapped on planes and nobody helping me. I wake up sometimes feeling like I can't breathe. Mom, what if I never stop being scared? Patricia felt tears prick her eyes because this was the cost nobody talked about, the trauma that settlements couldn't heal, the invisible wounds that never fully closed. Being scared after what you went through makes sense, she said gently. That's why we have you in therapy. That's why we're taking time to heal. And baby, I'm going to tell you something my mother told me when I faced discrimination. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What matters is what you do with that fear. Do you let it make you smaller, or do you let it make you stronger? Alicia was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights of the city below. I want to be stronger, she finally said. I want what happened to me to mean something. I want other kids to be safer because I spoke up. Mom, do you think the flight attendant understands what she did was wrong? Or does she just understand she got caught? Patricia sighed, because that question got to the heart of everything. I think Catherine Miller understands she destroyed her career and her reputation. Whether she understands the deeper harm, the racism, the way she almost killed a child because of her prejudice, I don't know. Some people change when they face consequences. Some people just learn to hide their racism better. We can't control what's in her heart. We can only control the systems that allowed her to act on that racism for years without facing accountability. What about the passengers who didn't help? Alicia asked. The ones who recorded me but didn't speak up until it was almost too late? Do they feel bad? Some of them reached out, Patricia said. Some sent apologies. Some are donating to the foundation we're starting. Some probably feel terrible guilt. But baby, here's the hard truth. Guilt without action is useless. What matters is whether they'll speak up next time. Whether your story changed them enough that they'll be different when they witness injustice again. Alicia leaned against her mother, exhausted from the day, from the speaking, from carrying the weight of being a symbol when she just wanted to be a kid who loved marine biology. Mom, when can I go to marine biology camp? When can I just be normal again? Patricia kissed the top of her daughter's head, her heart breaking for the innocence that had been stolen. Next summer, she promised. We're signing you up for the program again. And this time, I'm flying with you. We're going to make sure you get to explore those coral reefs and study those sharks and be the scientist you're meant to be. What happened to you doesn't get to steal your dreams. It doesn't get to make you smaller. We're going to make sure it makes you bigger, stronger, more determined. Alicia nodded against her mother's shoulder. Hey, she whispered. But Mom? Next time, can we just drive? Patricia laughed through her tears, holding her daughter close as the sun set over Washington, D.C., both of them scarred but surviving, broken but healing, forever changed but refusing to be defeated. They'd fought and won, but the victory felt incomplete because justice always did when trauma was the price paid for change. Still, they'd speak up, keep fighting, ensure Alicia's suffering created a world where the next child might suffer less. That was all any parent could do, all any victim could hope for. Turn pain into purpose, trauma into testimony, suffering into systemic change. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And sometimes progress was enough. 1 year later, Alicia stood on a dock in the Florida Keys, wearing a wetsuit and snorkeling gear, finally living the dream that had been delayed but not destroyed. She'd completed the marine biology camp the previous summer with her mother by her side every moment, and now she was volunteering as a junior counselor, helping younger kids discover the ocean's wonders. The nightmares had faded, though they hadn't disappeared completely. The fear of flying remained, though therapy had made it manageable. The scars, visible and invisible, were still there. But so was Alicia, thriving and determined and refusing to let racism define her story. Patricia watched from the shore, her phone buzzing with updates about the foundation they'd established with the settlement money. The Alicia Thompson Passenger Rights Initiative had already helped 12 families file discrimination complaints against airlines, had trained over 50,000 flight attendants in implicit bias recognition, and had successfully lobbied for federal legislation requiring airlines to report all discrimination incidents to an independent oversight board. Catherine Miller had served 8 months of her sentence and been released on parole, required to complete hundreds of hours of community service and anti-racism education. The other crew members had faced similar consequences, their aviation careers permanently ended. But the real change, Patricia believed, wasn't in the policies or the punishments. It was in the conversations. Parents talking to their children about what Alicia endured. Flight attendants questioning their own biases. Passengers committing to speak up instead of staying silent. The viral videos had sparked a national dialogue about racism in air travel that was uncomfortable but necessary, painful but productive. Alicia dove beneath the surface, swimming alongside a sea turtle, her face lit with pure joy visible even through her mask. This moment, this dream realized, was what justice looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. Enough to move forward, enough to heal, enough to prove that trauma didn't have to be the end of the story. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think racial discrimination and prejudice can end? I want your honest answer. Not what you think you should say, what you actually believe. Can we build a world where children like Alicia receive care instead of contempt, where their pain is believed instead of dismissed? What do you think needs to happen to stop this? More laws? Better training? Personal accountability? Bystander intervention? Cultural transformation? Tell us in the comments what you believe would actually create lasting change. Do you think serving justice, imprisoning Catherine Miller, settling the lawsuit, changing airline policies, is enough to end discrimination? Or is something deeper required? Can policy change hearts? Or do hearts have to change first? Drop your thoughts below. Here's the hardest question, and I want you to be brutally honest with yourself. Have you ever stayed silent when you witnessed someone suffering? What stopped you from helping? Was it fear? Uncertainty? Not wanting to get involved? And what would it take for you to be like Angela Porter next time, the person who intervenes when everyone else walks past? Because there will be a next time. Discrimination didn't end with Catherine Miller's conviction. Someone, somewhere, is experiencing it right now. Drop your answers in the comments. I'm reading every single one. No judgment here. Just honest conversation about how we build the world where children can be sick without their blackness making adults assume they're faking, where calling for help results in care instead of violence, where humanity matters more than prejudice. And if you want racism to become a thing of the past, if you want to be like Angela Porter who saved a child's life when everyone else had given up, if you want to be someone who speaks up instead of records, who helps instead of ignores, then like this video right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're not just telling stories, we're documenting injustice and demanding accountability. We're showing that consequences are possible, that speaking up saves lives, that one person's courage can spark systemic change, that mothers will fight for their children, and that victims' voices matter. Share this video so parents can prepare their children for a world that might not treat them fairly. Share it so medical professionals understand that implicit bias kills. Share it so flight attendants recognize that their prejudice has consequences. Share it so bystanders understand that silence is complicity. Every share is an act of resistance. Every comment is a commitment to do better. Every subscription says that Black children's lives matter, that their pain is real, that their humanity is non-negotiable. Because discrimination thrives in silence. Your voice matters. Speak up.